Welcome back to another in-season edition of the Big Ten Quick Talk podcast. If you have not already, subscribe to the channel down below as it helps out a metric ton. All right, in today's video, we will be going over every single Big Ten game that happened on Saturday. So let's dive right in. Before we start out, we do have two teams on a bye. That would be the Northwestern Wildcats and the Iowa Hawkeyes. All right, let's dive right in. We have, as our first game we're going to talk about here, Washington and Rutgers. Rutgers really made a big deal out of this game, I will say. It was a blackout. It was everything you wanted to see out of a fan base that has been slowly growing and coming out of its shell, ever since they were, you know, pretty darn bad. They've really come out and supported their team, which is awesome, and that's great. And this game was actually really close, closer than I thought it would be. I thought Rutgers would take a hold of this game and go, but Washington stood their ground. But my takeaway from this game is Washington tried to play the way they normally play, and it did not work. You have these awesome box scores from Washington. Will Rogers threw for 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, threw for over 300 yards. Rushing, Jonah Coleman went for 148 yards. They just tried to play the way they usually play in the Pac-12 or what have you. Go, 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 offense, go. But you're playing a Big Ten team in Rutgers that epitomizes what the Big Ten is all about, where it's smash mouth, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and just playing elite run stopping defense, holding you, and playing the field position game. And those two styles just collided head on with each other, and Rutgers came out on top. So you wonder what's going to win games. It's going to be this persistent Rutgers style approach. I mean, Ethan Kaliakmanis only threw for 115 yards and a touchdown. Kyle Monangai obviously went for a ton of yards, 132 to be exact. Sammy Brown filled in nicely, went in for 44 yards as well. But it was just a game where Washington was in it all the way through because the way they play, they're going to be in games. But Rutgers played the way they needed to play to win the game. All right, let's move on to the next game. Moving from Friday to Saturday, Minnesota lost in a close one to number 12 Michigan, 24-27. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't think Minnesota is that good. So how does that reflect on Michigan? From my point of view, it makes me think that Michigan is very vulnerable and weak. They need some sort of passing attack. With Jack Tuttle, they had that passing attack, but they couldn't get anything done because, number one, yes, he could throw the ball, but it was just dysfunctional he was leading a dysfunctional offense. But with Alex Orji, you cannot throw the ball at all, but you can really play that Iowa style of game. And if that's what Michigan is going to turn into, an Iowa style team, then I don't see them making the college football playoff. I'm going to be honest with you guys because there's way better teams on their schedule than Minnesota. And if you're really going to have to dig one out versus Minnesota, then I don't know what to tell you. I mean, Khalil Mullings is a great running back, and he is complemented by, Donovan Edwards. Uh, I did not think that I would be saying that earlier in the year, but here we are. And I mean, they really need Alex Orji to come alive as a passer. I know that that's not in the playbook right now. They're just trying to scrap and win games, but man, it's just not a good look. Minnesota hung in there at the big house. Max Brosmer, FCS Max, threw for 258 yards, threw a pick as well. Excuse me. He took 5 sacks, so I think that was the big one in this game. Really helped out Michigan. He threw a pick and took 5 sacks. I think that was the clear indicator here on why Michigan had that edge, but really you take 1 or 2 less sacks and you don't throw that pick, I think Minnesota might have a shocking upset on their hands. Moving to the next game that we have here, Maryland got shellacked by the Indiana Hoosiers. Indiana moves to 5-0. Maryland is now 3-2. We don't really have to go over the game too much. I mean, this was a blowout from the beginning. Curtis worked through it for a crap ton of yards. They rushed for over 150 yards as a team. It was just all over the place. 5 sacks for the Indiana defense, 8 TFLs. On Maryland's side of things, I mean, the stat line doesn't look too bad. They rushed as a team for 112, Billy Edwards passed for 289 yards, 3 sacks, 6 TFLs. But really looking forward for these teams, Indiana, they will be 6-0. They will beat Northwestern. Northwestern's not a good team at all, which makes them, in my mind, they have played the 3 of the 4 worst Big Ten teams, and they will play, I think, one of the worst Big Ten teams in Purdue at the end of the year. So they would have played the bottom 4 Big Ten teams, in my opinion, in UCLA, Maryland, Northwestern next week, and Purdue at the end of the year. And that alone will propel them to a bowl season game, and then they'll play Michigan State, which is right there as well. Washington is an easier team to beat. Really, your 3 games on your schedule that you're really going to need to work for to win is Nebraska, Michigan, and Ohio State. And you probably beat either Nebraska or Michigan, in my opinion. Probably not both, but we'll see. I think when people give a lot of hype to Indiana, I don't see it as much just because they have played nobody. 2 pretty bad group of 5 teams, an FCS team, and 2 of the worst Big Ten teams out there. They're going to be 6-0 and they're going to have a lot of hype, but frankly, I don't see it as much as other people. I still think that they should be receiving a ton of votes. I just don't think they should be a top 25 team yet until they play someone worth note, we could say. On Maryland's side of things, they really need to turn this season around. They do play Northwestern as their next game, but then past that, they have USC, Minnesota on the road, and Oregon on the road as well. And then you have Rutgers, Iowa, Penn State to end the year. So really, if Maryland wants to make a bowl game, they're going to have to create 2 shocking upsets, in my opinion. I think they'll beat Northwestern. Minnesota probably the next game that I think that they would win, but I think that Minnesota would be favored in this game. Then you have to beat either Rutgers or Iowa, in my opinion, because you're not beating USC, you're not beating Oregon, and you're not beating Penn State, and you're probably not beating Rutgers either. So I mean, you'd have to beat Iowa, and I don't think that they will to make a bowl game. This Maryland team is just not a very good one, in my opinion. Billy Edwards is a very solid quarterback, but man, I just don't see it with this Maryland team. Moving on to the next game, Nebraska beat Purdue 28-10. This game was deadlocked at 0 at half, thanks to Nebraska missing 3 field goals. 2 of them got blocked. I don't know what's going on there. They need to make a substitution. They need to make a change or something because it is just not working on this special teams unit. Purdue hung in there, made some good stops in their own territory at the beginning of the game, but just offensively could never get it done. Nebraska's defense looked really good against a terrible Purdue offense, and rightly so. Purdue fired their offensive coordinator late Sunday night, and I think that will help them going forward, but I still think Purdue is one of the worst Big Ten teams out there. Nebraska going forward, they got 2 wins to make it to a bowl game and snap that streak. They have Rutgers this upcoming week at home. That's a very interesting game. The spread is Nebraska by 7 points. I'd be taking Rutgers right there all day, but I still think that Nebraska can definitely pull this game out. Then they have a top 25 ranked Indiana team. We already went over that on the road after a bye. You have UCLA on the schedule, Wisconsin and Iowa on the schedule as other potential wins. So Nebraska could get up to 8-9 wins if they really play well. But we're going to have to wait and see on them for that. In this game, though, Dylan Raiola played phenomenal, as he always does. No interceptions. That's the key stat there. Threw for 258 yards on 17 completions. He averaged about 9.6 per attempt. His QBR was at around 84, which is very much above average. Ja'Cory Barney led the way rushing and had a couple snags. Receiving, even though he's a receiver, they used him a lot in jet sweeps and end arounds, attacking the edges of this defense because the edges, frankly, aren't that good. They're Purdue's stout up the middle. They really are. They got some big boys up the middle, and it was hard for Nebraska to run it up the middle. And then they got Emmett Johnson going, who should be the undisputed number 1 on this team. On Purdue's side of the ball, Hudson Card, man, I know that they don't have anyone else back there, but it's really hard to win games with him under this system. Again, another reason why they fired their offensive coordinator. His QBR was 33.9. Threw an interception late in the game, which really sealed the deal. It was a pick 6 by John Bullock. By the way, he's playing phenomenal. Should be an everyday player in the NFL in the coming years. Devin Mockabee was bottled up averaged only 3.2 yards per carry. On the receiving end, lots of players who were in the mix. Jaron Tibbs, Max Clary, Drew Bieber were all in the mix. But again, they didn't have too many yards. It was just, one of those ideas. I mean, they only had one sack on Rayola. If you're going to beat Rayola, you have to sack him. You have to get him under pressure. That's what I've noticed. And frankly, Purdue didn't do that. Moving to the back half of Saturday's slate, we have USC in the only 3:30 slate taking on Wisconsin. I thought that this would be a really good game at the beginning of the year, but then Wisconsin lost their starting quarterback and what have you. And USC was on the field for 80 plus plays. That is an insane amount of plays on offense to run, and it wore down the Wisconsin defense. The Wisconsin defense did not look very deep. They're pretty good. Mind you, I still think the Wisconsin defense is pretty good, but they did not look deep enough to be able to keep up with USC. USC played great in this game. Their defense obviously is going to look good against backup QB, but they looked solid. They didn't look great, but they looked solid. And that's what they need from their defense because they'll be able to score. And we saw it here. Miller Moss threw for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, and only took 1 sack for 2 yards. That's the big thing there. His offensive line kept him upright, and he made some fabulous throws as well. A lot of them went to Jacoby Lane. 13 targets, 10 receptions for 105 yards. He played outstanding in this game. Zachariah Branch as well played great, and he was just dueling it out to everyone. Deuce Robinson, Kyron Hudson, Woody Marks even got in on the action. Ford, all these guys were in on the action. Yes, Branch and Moss did fumble the ball. I think that is pretty concerning. In my opinion, you cannot have your QB fumbling the ball, and most certainly you can't have your leading wide receiver drop the ball as well. That's really, if that continues to persist, you can't beat Penn State that way. If you're fumbling the ball, you cannot beat Penn State. If you're fumbling the ball, you cannot beat Ohio State. If you're fumbling the ball, you cannot beat these big time teams like Oregon. So that is a little bit concerning for me, but it is a very solid win for USC and, validating a lot of points for USC, beating a middle of the road Big Ten team, a solid opening Big Ten win. Well, I checked that. They did lose to Michigan last week, but, and then going forward, they will play at Minnesota. Minnesota, like I said, I don't think they're a very good team, but they'll be able to sneak up on you, and playing at Minnesota is a tough thing to do before they come back home and play Penn State. On the Wisconsin side of things, it doesn't look too good. They're going to really have to buckle down here. Braden Locke only threw for 180 yards. Taiwan Walker just wasn't doing it. Ches Malusi just wasn't doing it. They were just stuck in neutral. They went for it on 4th down multiple times and did not get it. It's just stuff like that really needs to be cleaned up. Now, they do have Purdue next week at home. I think that should be a win. Then you have Rutgers and Northwestern before you go and play a marquee opponent in Penn State, and that is at home. So you really need to have things go right. I mean, I think you'll beat Purdue and you'll beat Northwestern. I don't think you'll beat Rutgers. So that puts you at 4-3 going into the Penn State game, and then past that, it's going to be a really, really hard slate as they play at Iowa versus Oregon and at Nebraska, all games in which I think that they will probably lose if they keep playing like this. The next game, most of the rest of these games were tune-up Big Ten games, I guess you could say. Ohio State beat up on Michigan State. Michigan State, they did get it into the red zone 4 separate times on offense against Ohio State, which was a little bit troubling, but then Ohio State in the second half came out, put the clamps on, and got down to business. But Michigan State, it is concerning that they got there 4 times and only got 7 points out of it. Yeah, you do want to get as many points as you want, but yeah, at least it's good they're getting there. Aiden Childs, I still think, will be a good quarterback, but he is a mystery to me still. Threw an interception. At least it was only 1 this time. Man, because he'll throw a lot at you. And they wanted him to throw it less in this game. He only threw it 19 times. Excuse me. So I do think that Michigan State, probably one of the lower tier Big Ten teams, and going forward for them, you have, excuse me, Oregon, Iowa, and Michigan, and Indiana and Illinois all coming up. All teams that are ranked, with the exception of Iowa, who I think should be in the top 35, I would say. And that's the rest of their schedule. So they might not even make a bowl game. I don't know if they'll even get to 5 wins this year. Um, I'm rooting for them to get to 6 wins, but it's going to be really hard. The road ahead for Ohio State, that was a bit of a tune-up for Iowa, Oregon, Nebraska, and Penn State. 4 very formidable opponents. I think they could very much lose to Oregon and Penn State, as those are both on the road. They'll probably beat Iowa. They'll probably beat Nebraska, but if Nebraska keeps getting better, I think that game could be a trap game. It may yet be even the definition of a trap game. Moving on, Illinois got beat by Penn State. They put up a good fight, but their offense was just not there. That environment just overwhelmed them a bit. They scored on their opening drive, but past that, I mean, Luke Altmaier did not throw for over 200 yards. Took 5 sacks. Caden Fegan just wasn't doing it on the ground. And on Penn State's side, you have Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, who both went for 90-plus yards. Katron Allen went for 102 yards. Like, these two guys are the best 2 running backs in all of college football. You cannot tell me otherwise. Yes, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins are great, but they're not feeding them like Penn State's feeding these two guys. 18 carries for Katron Allen and 16 carries for Nick Singleton, and they are it's just many yards. I don't know how you can keep both of them in this era of transfer portal and NIL, but they do. And, Drew Aller didn't have to do too much in this game. Only threw for 135 yards, no touchdowns at all. But, that's just how it is. Tyler Warren putting up a solid game, scored a touchdown rushing. Harrison Wallace III, pretty darn good wide receiver. Didn't put up many yards in this game, but showed out when he did. The defense, all over the place. Abdul Carter, he had a sack. He forced a fumble. AJ Harris also had a sack. It was just greatness on defense, and they didn't have to do too much either. A lot of 3-and-outs and whatnot. Oregon beat UCLA, but not by as much as really I thought they would, 34-13. And, Oregon isn't going to be world beaters this year. They're not going to be this juggernaut, unstoppable team that some people made them out to be in the offseason. They do have their struggles. Dylan Gabriel, I don't think, is a Heisman caliber QB as yet. I think that he can get there, but I think he's on the outside looking in on a core group of guys that I can break down a little later. But like I said, I think that there are still some holes which Oregon can fill out. I think that they can become more physical. I think that they can tweak the playbook a little bit, and I think that they can play a little bit better on defense. And but when it comes to this game, started real late. I'm gonna be honest with you. Started at 11. It was hard to stay awake for the whole game and whatnot, but Oregon really showed that they're a superior team over UCLA. I don't think that's saying too much. UCLA is now 1-3. Looking ahead for UCLA, they play Penn State, Minnesota, and Rutgers, and then Nebraska, and then Iowa. I could really only see them beating Minnesota. UCLA is really one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. They are JV Big Ten. They don't honestly belong in the Big Ten the way that they are playing, but hey, they're here. UCLA, I mean, Ethan Garbers threw the ball 20 times for 118 yards. Threw the ball, completed 12 of them. Threw 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. I mean, it's just bleak looking at the box score for UCLA. Oregon's box score looks much better. Jordan James finally gets going on the ground, 20 carries for 103 yards. Tez Johnson, really with this wide receiver core, it's like it doesn't matter who it is, but it is someone every game, whether it's Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden, or Evan Stewart. One of them will go off, and it's guaranteed. All right, that's enough yapping from me. Y'all know what to do. Subscribe, like the video, share it with other college football fans, and comment your thoughts down below on this week. And I will see you guys in next week's game week recap. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you then.